Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the IndieZone Podcast. My name is Kathy. At the bottom of page 54, the continuation of our special series, reading the hearing transcript from the closed, sealed January 23rd, 2025 hearing that was held before Judge Stephen J. Hippler on the defense's motion to suppress. IGG continues with the testimony of Rylene Nolan of the Idaho State Police. Line 25 states, question, would validation be part of that validation studies? This is the top of page 55. Answer, I wouldn't assume so. I wouldn't assume that would be part of this. No. Question, would bench notes be important? The court, I'm sorry, I didn't hear that. What notes? Ms. Taylor, bench notes, lab bench notes. The court, thank you. The witness, this is Rylene stating, for our laboratory, we designate those as part of our case record. I'm not familiar with what Othram designates as part of their case record. Ms. Taylor, question, so I guess then that means you don't have any of those. Answer, no, only the preliminary report. Question, all right, I will move to a different area of questioning, and it's about the requirements with Othram. You mentioned the goal was to create profiles and create a report, but to search public databases. Answer, correct. There are public genealogy databases that will allow entry of law enforcement samples, and that is part of the scope of work. They were required to enter it into those databases. So we're finding here that Othram did in fact enter certain genetic genealogy databases from private organizations. It appears that allows law enforcement entry. Ladies and gentlemen, we're continuing page 55, line 25, going into 26, line 1, with questioning by Ms. Taylor of Rylene Nolan of Idaho State Police. Question, and are you aware that there are databases that do not allow law enforcement to search? Answer, yes. Question, were you part of work after Othram began their work to try and do an investigation? Answer, I was not. As far as I guess, I'm unclear. We received evidence submitted to the laboratory before, during, and after for all sections. Is that what you're referring to? Question, let me rephrase my question. I think that question was too broad. While Othram was doing their work, were you part of any work to help Othram? For instance, did you get any documents that you did some research on to try to help Othram? Answer, no. Were you aware that Othram was just stopped from doing any further work at some point? Answer, I was aware of that. Question, and was this before they produced any result? Answer, no. We received a preliminary report. I recall receiving that because that's how I know I can approve payment of the invoice. So I know we received that prior to them being told they were stopped. So here we're learning that although there is what appears to be a quality assurance program in place where the purchasing department gives the final approval of what outside agency the ISP will be doing business with, it is Ms. Nolan who is approving payment of the invoices that were sent from Othram. This is information from lines 21 to 25, page 26. Again, we are giving our opinions here relative to the First Amendment of the United States Constitution. We continue now with Ms. Taylor's direct examination of Ms. Nolan, top of page 57, line 1, question, were you part of the decision to stop them? Answer, I was not. Question, how did you find out about it? Answer, I found out about it in an email from my laboratory systems director. Question, do you remember what happened when that happened? Answer, I don't recall. Question, does the forensics lab continue to contract with Othram? Answer, yes. Question, if Othram had a file that would have had validation studies and bench notes, anything they did on the case, who would have received them? Answer, again, validation studies would be odd to associate with individual cases, so I wouldn't assume they would do that. Again, I'm not familiar with their procedures. And as far as who would receive documents, usually it would be, I would assume, the agency which we received that preliminary report. Question, you mentioned you're not familiar with their procedures. Answer, not in detail, no. Question, what procedures are you familiar with for Othram? Answer, for Othram, this is the top of page number 58 of 175. Ms. Taylor clarifies, yes. Answer, as part of the bid process, all of the bidders were required to submit, I believe they were required to submit their procedures, and it was essentially just looking over them to say, yes, they have a procedure in place for extracting DNA, yes. They have a procedure in place for doing SMPs, so yes, they meet the minimum for the invitation to bid. But again, I'm not qualified in that technology, so I wouldn't have studied them or rendered an opinion on them. Question, I won't ask you for your opinion on them. I won't ask you to quote them to me, but you saw them? Answer, yes, at the very beginning of the bid process. Question, let's switch gears. In the case we are here for today, do you recall there being a trash pull? The court reporter now interjects. Sometimes a court reporter will do so if he or she is not able to clearly hear what the question or the answer is. And we see the court reporter doing this, line 21 and 22. The court reporter, I'm sorry, there being a what? Ms. Taylor, a trash pull. The witness, I recall receiving evidence from a trash pull. Correct. We're at the bottom of page 58. What this is referring to is the trash pull from the residence where Mr. Kohberger was. After he left his apartment in Pullman, drove across the country with his father. This was over the December-January holidays. From Washington State University. He was at his parents' home in Monroe County, Pennsylvania, at the time that this trash pull happened, and it's where this trash pull occurred, ladies and gentlemen. We go into page 59, top number 1 by Ms. Taylor. What role did you have in deciding anything about the trash pull? A. Answer, nothing about the trash pull occurring. I do recall there being a brief, I don't remember if it was a phone meeting or a video meeting, and just being asked in general what items from someone's trash are good for DNA. Question, did you give advice? Answer, I don't know if it was me specifically or another member of our DNA unit, but we did offer suggestions on items that are good for DNA. So here we're learning for the first time of ISP's involvement in directing or at least providing some input, some advice as to what sorts of trash would be preferable for DNA testing. This is what appears Rylene Nolan is testifying to in this portion of the transcript, ladies and gentlemen. We continue. This is page 59, line 13. Did you receive items to test? Answer, yes. Question, what instructions were you given about those items? Answer, the discussion was a person of interest had been developed and to analyze the items from the trash to determine if they could be inclusive of the DNA profile that was developed from the sheath, unknown male A. Question, what date was that you received the trash? Answer, the trash was received into the laboratory on December 28th of 2022. This is the bottom of page 59. We are now going into page 60, continuing with the direct examination of Rylene Nolan from Ann Taylor of the defense team. Question. So you were looking for a male profile? Answer. Correct. All right. Question. Did you find male profiles? Answer. I didn't perform the actual testing, but yes, there were male profiles developed. Question. How many? Answer. I don't know. Question. Do you know anything about either male profile or any of them? Answer. I believe one of the male profiles designated as E was determined they could be a biological parent or child of the profile from the knife sheath. Question. And are you aware that Brian Kohberger's DNA was in the trash? Answer. I was not aware. Question. Did you become aware? Answer. I became aware later. We didn't have his name at that time. Question. You didn't know his name on December 28th. This is line 22 where she responds, no, I did not. Question. Okay. Were you on December 28th, were you aware that not male E, but another male profile had been identified? Bottom of page 60, going into 61. Question. Answer. Line 1. From Q, the trash. A. Answer. The trash pull. I knew there were some mixtures of DNA that were also included. Question. One of the mixtures, did it have a male DNA profile? Answer. I believe it did. Question. And wasn't that profile the major component of that profile with a minor female? Answer. I believe that sounds correct. Question. And later didn't that return to Brian Kohberger? Answer. We actually did not perform that comparison. Question. Did you and I have a discussion a few days ago? Answer. We did. So it appears here we're learning for the first time that Ms. Taylor and Ms. Nolan of the ISP apparently had some sort of a conversation a few days ago prior to this hearing. Again, line 16, question. Did you and I have a discussion a few days ago? Answer. We did. Question. Did you tell me that you knew that to be Brian Kohberger's DNA? Answer. I said I thought it was, and I could not find the report where we had done that comparison. I've since looked through, and we did not make that comparison, so I cannot say that he was included in the mixture. Our laboratory did not do that. Line 60, page 61, end, going into 62, comparison. Our laboratory did not do that comparison. Line 2 of page 62. But a DNA profile was made for that mixture. Is that right? Answer, yes. And there's a minor female and a major male. Answer, that is my understanding. Question, and could by eye look at that and tell that that's Brian Kohberger's? Couldn't you, if you wanted to? Answer, if I wanted to, I could probably look. I did not. Question, okay. You could still do it today if you wanted to. Answer, if there was a request to do the comparison, again, we don't do a visual comparison evidence to evidence. Our procedure don't allow to do that for probative comparisons. Line 19, I need you to help me understand that a little bit. I'm having that question because I understood there was an unknown male B found on lab item 30. Did you know what I'm talking about? Answer, no. Question, okay, well, I also understand that there was a cigarette butt taken from somebody in connection with the case investigation. Are you familiar with that? We are now going into the top of page 63 for this continuation of the direct examination of Rylene Nolan. Again, bottom of page 62 going into 63. Okay, well, I also understand that there was a cigarette butt taken from somebody in connection with the case investigation. Are you familiar with that? Answer, I am familiar with that. Question, and that was compared to the DNA on the knife sheath. Is that right? Answer, yes. And that was found to be excludable. Am I using that word right? Answer, it was an exclusion. Correct. Question, so you compared something that was taken from somebody to an item of evidence. Is that right? Answer, something that was a secondary reference, as in someone identified it as they saw that person using that item. They saw that person dispose of that item. That item was collected as a reference sample from that person because there was someone who said that is from that person. Question, okay, when you got the trash to go through the lab, you knew that you were looking for a male, right? Answer, correct. And you knew that the male and his family members lived in a house that produced that bag of trash. Is that right? We're at the bottom of page 63. We are learning now that apparently law enforcement collected a bag of trash or went through a bag of trash from the trash pull in Monroe County, the house in Albrightsville. Top of page 64. Answer, yes, but not who produced each individual item in that trash pull. Question, okay. Answer, it wasn't labeled, quote, this water bottle is from person of interest. This tissue is from a sibling. This Q-tip is from a parent. End of quote. We don't have that information. It was just, quote, here's some items from a trash pull, end of quote. So here we're learning that apparently some items, and it may be a Q-tip, it may be a tissue, it may be a water bottle. We don't know if Ms. Nolan is using this as comparison purposes, as just examples, or if this was what actually got pulled from the bag in Albrightsville, Pennsylvania. Question, and one of those items you took and developed male E as in Edward? Answer, I did not, but yes, the laboratory did. Question, in general, the lab developed male E. Answer, yes, correct. Question, and compared male A and male E. Again, male A is the sheath. Answer, there was a paternity statistic calculated because they were both single source profiles, meaning only from one individual. Question, okay, and there's another male profile. Answer, that was part of a mixture to my knowledge, meaning more than one person's DNA present on that item. Question, again, only one male though, is that right? Answer, so when there's a mixture on an item, and we're going now into the top of the next page of evidence, I don't know if you want me to explain the process. The first step is determining number of contributors to that mixture. Then our laboratory utilizes a software program to help break out the components of that mixture. When one individual is male, it's not always possible to say the gender of the second person. Males have an X and a Y chromosome. Females only have an X. So if there's an X and a Y present, it could be one male. It could be two males. It could be a male and a female. Without comparison to known reference samples, I can't say that. And I haven't seen the profile to my knowledge. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to take a sip of coffee here as we now consider the testimony of Ms. Rylene Nolan of ISP. We are now going to continue with the direct examination of Ms. Nolan. Question, line 14, page 65. Okay, did you tell me though, or that sample, and I'm talking about 95.9.1, that was a male and a female? Answer, I believe that. I don't know if it was designated as that in the laboratory report. To my knowledge, it was. I don't remember what the report said. Again, I don't generate the report and didn't do the work, so I'm not familiar with it as if it were my own work. Okay, male B was also a mixture, wasn't it? Answer, I don't know. Top of page 66. Okay. Answer, if it was designated as unknown male B, again, I don't know if it was from the mixed sample or not. Ms. Taylor, Your Honor, if I may have just a moment, thank you for that. Line 7, just a couple other questions for you. As it relates to male E, it was compared to the sheath. Is that right? Answer, correct. I want to point out something to you. Ladies and gentlemen, when someone like Ms. Taylor says, Your Honor, if I may have just a moment, thank you for that, the court reporter doesn't note down how many minutes Ms. Taylor may be going back, referring to her notes, discussing with other members of the team. If there's any questions that one of the other two attorneys in the room suggest should be asked based on their feedback. It just ends with, Your Honor, if I may just have a moment, thank you for that, lines 5 and 6. Now we go into her question. We don't know how long of a break this took. Question. Just a couple other questions for you. As it relates to male E, as in Edward, it was compared to the sheath. Is that correct? Answer. Correct. A paternity comparison. Question. Male E profile was compared to a lot of other evidence items in this case, wasn't it? Answer. Correct. Question. And you are allowed to do a manual interpretation per your policy, right? Answer. If there is, so it's not black and white. So if it is a single source and we can look at it and say that that person is excluded, they are not the source of the DNA, then yes, they can be done manual. And by manual, I mean a person looking at it. So here we're learning this term manual is physically looking at a sample. We continue on. We are at the bottom of 66, line 21. If it is a probative comparison, and how we define a probative comparison is if it's saying something about who could be the source of the DNA on an item of evidence that's relevant to the case, then no, we do not do a manual comparison and issue and we're at the bottom of 66 going into 67, statement about that, because all of our standards, we have to issue a statistic so that the trier of fact has something to gauge how unique that could be. What is the likelihood that the DNA could be from someone else? We provide that statistic. We don't just say it matches. That requires a statistical calculation, which we use a probabilistic genotyping software to do. Line 9, question from Ms. Taylor. I apologize. I think I got lost in there. Are you telling me because it was a mix, you couldn't have done a manual interpretation on 95.9.1? Line 12. Answer. Because of a mixed profile and because if it was, you're saying it was Brian's DNA, Brian Kohberger's DNA present. That would be a probative comparison in the case, which we have to provide a statistic in order to make the statement. In order to deconvolute a mixture, we are no longer allowed to do those manually. Deconvolute, as in separate the mixture into its components. We have a software. That software was not designed for, nor was it validated for, doing evidence-to-evidence comparisons. Question. Now you're speaking my language. Validation is important for integrity. Is that right? Bottom of page 67. Top of page 68. 1. Answer. In forensics, our lab uses validating to ensure any new tool is working properly. Question. Now, at some point later, your lab issued a report saying, matching the DNA on the sheath with DNA taken from Brian Kohberger. Is that right? Answer. That's correct, and a statistic was provided. Now, I want to talk about what we're talking about when we say the sheath. This is a question from Ms. Taylor. You're familiar with what happened with the sheath for swabbing. Is that right? Answer. I've seen the sheath, and I know how our laboratory performs swabbing of evidence, but I did not swab that item of evidence, nor did I see it being swabbed. So Ms. Nolan is testifying here that while she saw the sheath, she herself did not swab from the snap, where apparently this DNA was taken from for comparison. This is the item that was found at the crime scene, nor did she see it being swabbed. Someone else did this. Question. As I understand it, though, you've read the lab notes. Answer. At one point, I believe I did read the notes. I think I was asked a question and the analyst was out of town or something. Question, and I think you answered that question to law enforcement after consulting somebody else who was with the swabber when the sheath was swabbed. Is that right? This is the bottom of 68 going into 69. Answer, it's sounding familiar. Question, if I understand the lab reports, it's a single source on that sheath. Is that correct? Answer, correct. Question, does that mean it's only one person in that area? Answer, yes, that was detected through our testing. Question, tell me where you think that sheath was swabbed for purposes of DNA collection. Answer, I believe the analyst swabbed. There's kind of a snap or a button that was at the top of the snap, and that's the area that was swabbed. There were other areas on it sampled as well. Question: for the purposes of unknown male A that you're telling us later came back to Brian Kohberger, that's the only person I want to talk about right now. Are we on the top of the button, the outside, or on the inside, the socket portion of the button? Answer: I know on the top. I don't recall if she swabbed the underside or not. I have to look at her notes though. So here we're learning that apparently the technician who did the physical swabbing from ISP is female. Her name has not been divulged, at least not as of yet. Undoubtedly, she will be a trial witness that will be called to testify at trial. But at this point, all we know is Ms. Nolan was the manager over this department, and there was an analyst, a technician who did the actual swabbing. She's not recalling if the snap of the sheath was swabbed on the inside, the underside of the sheath, the physical inside part, or at the top part where the physical button would be.